Hey everybody, Trevor here. Welcome to the webinar. I'm going to be teaching you guys something that's really important if you're doing any level of drop shipping on eBay. Whether you're doing the retail drop shipping method or you've got wholesale drop shippers, in any case, anytime you're not handling your own inventory, this becomes extremely important to people who are doing drop shipping on eBay. So if that's you, if you're doing some drop shipping, then this is definitely something you want to listen to. Now, last year, 2014, in the spring, eBay came out with their seller update. Now, they do this every single spring. They came out with one recently for 2015. And over the course of a year, eBay decides what things they want to change, policies they want to change, and then they usually release what those changes are in the springtime. Well, last year's change that sort of shook the world for eBay sellers was something called the defect rate. Okay. Now that's a new measurement. So if you don't know what defect rate is, we'll be teaching you about it right now. It's a measurement that eBay has internally that basically tracks how, if your account is in good standing or not with eBay. If your defect rate is high, that's problematic. You run the risk of losing your eBay account. If it's low, that's what we want. And let me define what that means. The number 5% is kind of the threshold, okay? So you want to be less than 5% of your transactions that have a defect. Now, I'm not talking about like a product defect or an issue with the way the product works. It's just the word defect in this context is basically eBay's way of saying something was wrong or didn't go so well about the transaction, okay? Or about the order. This will make more sense in just a second. Now, if you're doing drop shipping, this is particularly important because in drop shipping, we have stock issues on occasion, right? That's one of the biggest problems of doing a little bit of drop shipping is you can run into some out of stock issues, and that's problematic for your defect rate. Let's take a closer look though. So I'm here on this page. This is their spring seller update page. I'll just put this link in the video notes. And for those of you guys who are here live, I just sent it out so you can be here too. I'm going to scroll down to the defect rate here, and we're going to read some of this together and talk about it and make sure you guys understand in detail what's the defect rate. So this first bullet point right here, it says starting with the August 20th monthly seller evaluation. This was for 2014, so this is already passed. A new measure, the transaction defect rate, will replace the current 4 individual detailed seller rating requirements in evaluating seller performance. Now, what that means, guys, is they used to have a different way to measure how good your account was, how, what kind of standing your account was in, but they've changed it to use the defect rate. So that's all that's saying. The defect rate is the new standard, okay? It says the defect rate, and this is right here in bullet point 2. It says the defect rate is simply, and listen closely, the percentage of a seller's successful transactions that have one or more of the following transaction-related defects. The top predictors that a buyer will leave eBay or buy less. Okay, so what they're saying is if you have a transaction that takes place, meaning a seller finds your item, or I'm sorry, a buyer finds your item and sends you money through PayPal, that's a transaction, okay? So anytime you have somebody who pays you for a product, if one of these things happens, it's going to count as a defect. Let me zoom in so you guys can see this just a little bit better. This one right here, your detailed seller rating of 1, 2, or 3 for item as described. You might not realize this, but on eBay, when somebody buys from you and they leave you feedback, they also leave you some little star ratings for different criteria. Well, one of those is they have a chance to leave you from 1 to 5 stars on how well the item, or was the item as described. In other words, did they get what they thought they were going to get? If you get a 1, 2, or a 3 there, you'll get a defect. That counts as a defect against you. Okay. How do you prevent that? Well, just make sure you're pretty explicit on what you sell, right? That it's not a surprise. Like, for example, if you're listing a piece of furniture, let's say it's a piece of patio furniture, and in the picture, it has an umbrella, right? It has like a little umbrella, but then in the product description in really small text, it says umbrella not included, right? If that happens and somebody gets the item and they were thinking that they were going to get the umbrella and they didn't, they could give you a low detailed seller rating because of that. So the rule here is, guys, on your listings, just make sure you're as transparent as possible, that whatever you list to sell really is what it is. And you guys don't have problems with that. We're not trying to fool anybody. But that's one thing you got to keep in mind. If you get a 1, 2, or a 3 for item as described, you get a defect, okay? All right, second one. Detailed seller rating of 1 for shipping time. So that buyer has the opportunity to leave you a score as part of the feedback process for shipping as well, and it's called shipping time. If they felt like the shipping time was way too long and they drill you with a 1 for shipping time, you're in trouble for that. You're going to get a defect. Do you guys, when I say detailed seller ratings, for those of you guys who are here live, do you guys know what I'm talking about? Let me show you what I mean if you don't. I'm just going to do just a search and look up somebody's random account. Okay, so if you're looking at somebody's feedback score, okay, this is a huge company, Factory Direct Sale. That's their eBay ID. This is kind of small, so again, I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see this better. In the last month, they've had 10,810 positive feedback, 61 neutral, and 54 negative. Okay, that's just their general feedback score. To the right here are the detailed seller ratings, and this is what we've been talking about. Is the item as described? Was the communication good? How was the shipping time? And how was the shipping and handling charges? Well, according to this new defect rate measurement, if you get a 3 or less on the item described, it counts as a defect, okay? If you get a shipping time of 1, it counts as a defect. So those are things we're going to try to avoid. But for the most part, if you're just doing normal drop shipping, you're doing a good job with it, these aren't even going to be big concerns. Not so far anyway, okay? The third one is negative or neutral feedback. If somebody leaves you a negative or a neutral, it counts as a defect, okay? Fourth one is return initiated for a reason that indicates that the item was not as described. So if someone, in other words, if your buyer processes a return and the reason they process that return is because they didn't feel the item was what they thought they were getting, back to our example, they didn't get the umbrella, so the item technically wasn't as described, then you can get a defect for that. The fifth one here is eBay money back guarantee or PayPal purchase protection case opened for an item not received or an item not as described. So in essence, if somebody looks to open a case to eBay to get their money back because the item isn't as described, then that's a defect as well. And then last but not least, this is the big one that I want to talk about: seller canceled transactions. Now, in what situations, guys, would a seller, like yourselves, what situation would a seller look to cancel a transaction? And some of you guys who've been selling using drop shipping for a while will be able to probably answer that better than anything. Jim just asked, what's neutral feedback? Let's go back to that person's feedback score. When a buyer purchases from you and they're able to leave you feedback, they can leave you one of these here. It's going to be either a positive, a neutral, or a negative. Positive is obvious, negative is obvious, but neutral just means that they didn't feel like they had a negative or a positive experience. It was just kind of in the middle. Luckily, a lot of people don't leave neutral feedback. If they do leave you neutral feedback, you probably want to contact the person you sold the item to and find out why, and if there's anything you can rectify so that you can have that go to a positive, because neutral, in this case, counts as a defect, right? So back to my original question, under what circumstance would a seller look to cancel a transaction? Meaning, somebody already paid you some money for an item, but you decide to cancel the transaction. Why would that happen? Why would you ever cancel a transaction? Or what's the big reason why? There you go. Everybody's chiming in on the same issue. Out of stock, right? You can't control that very well, usually, if you're using a drop shipping supplier, because you don't carry the inventory. If you had the warehouse and you carried the inventory, you could make sure that you never run out of stock. And if you got low and you were running out of stock, you would preemptively pull your listing off, and that would be that. But we're looking at the one biggest weakness of doing any sort of drop shipping is that you can on occasion run out of stock because you don't control your inventory. And that's extremely negative for you, because if you do run out of stock and you contact the buyer and you initiate a cancellation, then that's going to count as a defect. Okay? That's going to count as a defect. We're going to talk about some strategies to get around that here in just a second. Okay, so let's see here. So those are the reasons why you can get defects. Questions about those? The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 reasons here. The main one you ought to be focused on is going to be the seller canceled transactions. That's the reason why most of you guys who I've worked with for a while have any defects at all. It's because you initiated a cancellation. Now, is there any way to avoid that? Not really, right? Because every once in a while you're just going to run out of stock on something and there's nothing you can do. But there are a couple things you could consider. One is offering alternatives. You could offer, instead of selling that specific type of barbecue grill, maybe you could offer them a different one that's a little bit better for the same price. And sure, maybe you don't make as much money, or maybe you lose a couple of bucks on it, but in order to avoid the defect, you would do it. So offering alternatives is always a good option. You could wait a couple of days, because sometimes suppliers get stock that goes in and out, especially if it's very seasonal stock. It can go in and out of stock, and maybe you wait a couple of days and don't initiate the cancellation until you've given your supplier a couple of days to bring the stock back in, right? How about go and find the product from somewhere else? Just because your supplier doesn't have it doesn't mean you can't hop online and search for the same product to buy from somewhere else. It might be an item that's exclusive to your supplier, but maybe not, and oftentimes you can find the product elsewhere. So it's always worth it. 100% of the time it's worth it to avoid a defect, to break even on the item, or even lose a couple of bucks. Now, if you guys are losing like 50, 60, 70 bucks to avoid a defect, maybe that's not worth it. But to lose a few bucks, it will be. Now, even with all these different ideas, there's still a chance that there's nothing you can do. You ran out of stock, you're stuck, there's no alternatives that the customer wants. You know, your supplier isn't going to get it back in because it's been discontinued. It's nowhere else on the internet. You can't find it anywhere. You have to cancel the transaction, and you're going to get a defect for that. Now, the problem with that is, guys, the standard here is 5%. Now, if you read right below where we're just looking, it says starting with the August 20th evaluation, to meet eBay's minimum standard, sellers can have up to a maximum of 5% of transactions with one or more transaction defects over the most recent seller evaluation period. 5%, guys, that's not a big number. So out of 100 transactions, you can't have more than 5 that were canceled because of out of stock or had one of those other issues take place. If you have more than 5 and you do that on any sort of a consistent basis, you run the risk of getting your account moved to below standard and then subsequently maybe even kicked off of eBay. So they're pretty serious, and I've seen it happen. I've seen a couple of clients a while back lose their account. Clients that have been selling and doing really well for a long time that just didn't track their defect rate closely enough, and they lost their account. So don't let don't let it alarm you. I mean, that's very rare that it happens, but that's why we're having this discussion, because I want to make sure that it doesn't happen to you guys. Now, here's my biggest strategy for you guys in order to avoid the defect rate, right? We shared that already. The cancellation is the biggest reason why you guys get why you guys get defects, right? Because you initiate these cancellations because you run out of stock. And I just said a minute ago that sometimes you can't avoid that at all. It's just going to happen. So the only thing you can do to really help that percentage is either have fewer defects or have more transactions. Does that make sense? So either you are flawless on your defects and you're not doing any out of stock issues, which is almost impossible, or you make it harder because you have so many transactions that those defects don't hurt you. This is a great example. Look at this seller right here. In the last month, based on this information that you guys are looking at right now, and I know we can only tell so much, but how many defects does this seller have in the last month based on what you can see here? Now, we don't know how many times they've initiated a cancellation, and we don't know how many times they got low scores in their detailed seller ratings, but we do know a couple of things, don't we? We do know how much negative feedback they've gotten in the past month. They've gotten 54, and we also know that neutral feedback is also problematic, isn't it? So that's 115. So we're talking 115 defects, right? Well, that's not that big of a deal because, look, they've had 10,810 successful transactions at least, because not every successful transaction is going to show up as a positive feedback. Some people don't even leave feedback, right? But even if you took that number on its face, 115 divided by 810, or 10,810, that's a 1%. 1% of their transactions, and probably much less. So that's not, I mean, even though they've had all these negative feedbacks, they're not at all at risk, are they? Because look how many positive transactions they've had. So this is the strategy here. We got to have more positive transactions. Now, how can we force that? Well, there's a couple things that we can do. Number one, go out to the grocery store or your local baseball card shop and buy a bunch of packs of baseball cards or basketball cards or football cards or Pokemon cards or Magic cards or whatever, right? Buy a pack of cards and get onto eBay and list each card individually for like a penny a piece and free shipping. Now, some of you guys are going to say, now, wait a minute. If you listed one of those cards at an auction for a penny and free shipping, what if only one person gets on and bids a penny for it, right? Well, you just sold that baseball card for 1 cent, but to ship it out, it's going to cost you money to ship it out, and it's going to cost you at least 30 cents in a transaction fee from PayPal. You might lose $1 on that transaction, right? Well, that might be worth it because it'll be a successful transaction for you. It's almost like that. In that way, you can manipulate the defect rate a little bit by artificially pushing up your score by having a lot of smaller transactions. cards are a great way to do it. Now, you don't have to do a penny a piece. You could actually list them for $1 a piece or 50 cents a piece and maybe break even on them. But guys, you see how that would artificially push up your number of transactions? So you might have 12 defects in the month from out of stock issues and otherwise that we talked about from doing drop shipping. And maybe you've only had, let's say you've had 80 successful transactions. Okay? But that still means you've had, that's what, 12 divided by 92 that's still a 13% defect rate. But what if you had a bunch of these cheaper sales to offset that? That's the idea. You want to offset your defect rate that's going to be higher with drop shipping with some of those small sales. And I found some of my very best sellers that know what they're doing on eBay, they still have high defect rates with their drop shipping. Like, they've tried all the tricks and they've always had a defect rate that is a little too high. So what do? They offset it, just like what I'm teaching you to do right now. That is what I want your biggest takeaway to be. Let's offset our defect rate with these smaller transactions. Now, you don't have to do it through baseball cards or basketball cards necessarily. It could be other little trinkety items that you could list that people would buy. You see it happen all the time on eBay. People buy almost anything they can get if they can get it for cheap, right? They don't even need to be popular baseball cards. It's amazing. You can sell these no-name, not valuable, not collectible baseball cards for 25, 30 cents, and people will buy them. And you can push up your scores that way. The other thing is, that's just direct manipulation, and I think that's fine because that's eBay's system, and we can do what we do there. But if you want to make money at the same time while doing it, I just recommend that you do the international product sourcing strategy, and you use a company like AliExpress.com. AliExpress.com is it's a large, mostly Asian company that sells things for very cheap. I wonder if you could buy baseball cards here. You can do a little search. No, these are baseball cards. No, it doesn't look like they carry baseball cards, but you could buy, like, I don't know, iPhone 6 charger. See this? You could buy like these little white charger cords. These are 65 cents a piece out of China. You'd be buying them directly out of China, and you could probably mark those up to $4, $5, $6 and make money off of it while you're also helping your defect rate. Okay, like, you can find all sorts of things here. You could do cell phone accessories. You could do anything. You could do cell phone cases. You could do like a iPhone 6 case. And you could get these cases for cheap. This is directly out of China. You could get this stuff for cheap, mark it up and sell it on eBay, even if you're just breaking even on it. It's helping you with successful transactions that you can control. You're never, ever, ever going to run out of stock when you carry your own stock, right? So I'm not saying this is going to be the way that you're making tons of money. I'm just saying that in our experience, drop shipping is risky because the defect rate often climbs over 5%. So let's offset it by having a little of our own inventory, even if that's just some cheap baseball cards and stuff that we list to sell to offset those problems. Right? Does that make sense, guys? And yeah, Delia, you could do that as an auction. For sure. You could list this type of stuff for 99 cents at an auction and just see what it goes for. And sometimes you'll make money and other times you may not. I always buy a lot of jewelry out of AliExpress, so you could come in here and buy a, silver. Yeah, you could do sterling silver necklace. Come through and buy some of these that are a little cheaper, All right, that little necklace right there is $2.35, right? I guarantee you could sell that for more than $2.35 on eBay. The reason this is so cheap is it's coming directly out of China, right? There's plenty of opportunities, and you can work with your coach on specifically what you should order and what you shouldn't. But the bottom line is between this, and you'll learn more about the international product sourcing strategy in some of our other presentations. This presentation isn't really to go into detail on that, other than to mention this as a way to offset your defect rate. To a question earlier, Myra, I saw it from you. You asked how to check on or how to track your defect rate. It's actually very easy to do. If you go to your eBay account, you're going to look for your seller dashboard. Okay, so I'm going to sign in. Let's just pull up just any eBay account real quick. Okay, let me sign into one. I guess it doesn't really matter. Let me just. So, Sue, I'm in. Sue, are you here? I think I'm in yours for some reason. I don't see Sue here. I don't want to be in Sue's account if Sue isn't here. Let me get into a different one. I'll sign into one of mine. Assuming I can get in here, right? I'm sure none of you guys have ever had problems with your login, right? See if that works. Nope. One of these will work. Here we go. Okay, so when you log into your eBay account, here's what you do. You go to your account section. In your My eBay section, you go to account. And there's a spot called your seller dashboard. It's this spot right here. So you're going to look for that, Myra, your seller dashboard. And under your seller dashboard, you can see what your defect rate is here, okay? Whether you're above standard or below standard, you can learn about your defect rate here in this section. So right there, one of your transactions had defects. That's what mine says right here, okay? Now this tracks over a 12-month period for most of you guys. So if you had defects in June of last year, well, June of this year, once June 2015 ends, those defects that took place last year in June will fall off your account, so they disappear. So defects don't stay on your account forever. They fall off over time, right? But so would your transactions that you had for that month as well. So anyway, if you had a month that was really bad, 1 month, you'll look forward to having that fall off 12 months later, right? Because that'll hopefully significantly lower that defect rate. Okay? Does that make sense, Myra? Did that help? Yeah, good. Good. Okay. So let's finish up with that. Those are your big takeaways. Let's understand that drop shipping on its own, because of out of stock issues, it can be very difficult to stay with under that 5%. So this is how we fix that. We artificially build up our defect score by doing more transactions. We use the retail strategy, the international strategy. We use cards, baseball cards, basketball cards, whatever we can do to bring up the number of transactions we have so that our defect rate stays as low as possible, okay? If you want more information on this, read up on that link that I sent you guys. Otherwise, good luck keeping those defect rates down. One other thing I forgot to mention. If you keep a good defect rate, eBay promises that you'll do better in search results. So that's one of the big benefits, and they actually write that out here on this page that we're looking at, or on the page that I sent you guys out a few minutes ago. They say one of the big benefits of keeping a low defect rate is increased search results or increased visibility within eBay. So that if that's not incentive enough, I don't know what is. Let's make sure that we do a good job with our defect rate so we get as much visibility as possible. Okay. All right. Well, let's finish up the recording. We're going to go ahead and turn off. For those of you guys who are watching this recorded, thanks for watching. And then I'll take some other questions here shortly thereafter. Thanks, everybody.